Tonight's story drifts along the edge of dream and nightmare, a journey down the Danube where two travellers find themselves lost among endless islands of whispering willows and something unseen that stirs within their shadows. Settle in, breathe deep, and let the quiet pull you under as we enter Algernon Blackwood's haunting masterpiece, The Willows. If you enjoy timeless tales told for quiet minds and late nights, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more narrated stories. After leaving Vienna long before reaching Budapest, the Danube enters a lonely, desolate region. Its waters spread wide across the land, forming a vast swamp that stretches for miles, a sea of low, whispering willow bushes. On the great maps, this empty area is marked with faint blue shading and the word Sumpfer, meaning marshes. During floods, the river nearly covers the entire plain, swallowing the sandy shores, the islands, and the willow-grown flats. But in calmer seasons, the bushes bend freely in the wind, their silver leaves flashing in sunlight like ripples on a living sea. These willows never grow into trees. They have no tall trunks or rigid branches. Instead, they remain low and soft, swaying constantly, supple as grass, restless as waves. When the wind moves over them, they rise and fall like the surface of the ocean, green one moment, silver-white the next. The whole plain seems to breathe, alive and moving. Here the Danube wanders without discipline. Freed from its stern banks, it spreads itself into a maze of twisting channels, cutting through islands and sandbars that form and vanish from day to day. The water shouts and foams as it tears at the shores, spinning whirlpools and roaring rapids, constantly shaping and reshaping the land. It is a place where the river seems most alive. Not a single river, but 1,000 shifting ones. We reached this strange country in our Canadian canoe, carrying little more than a gypsy tent and frying pan, riding the crest of a rising flood in mid-July. That same morning, before sunrise, we had slipped quietly through Vienna, its towers and smoke soon shrinking into a blur against the blue hills of the Wienerwald. We breakfasted under birch trees near Fischeramond, the wind roaring overhead, then sped downstream past Orth, Heinberg and Petronell, the old Roman Carnuntum of Marcus Aurelius, and beneath the grey cliffs of Thelsen, where the river March glides in from the left. There, between Austria and Hungary, we crossed the frontier. The flood's muddy waters raced us along at 12 kilometers an hour. More than once we ran aground on shingle beds or spun helplessly in sudden whirlpools before the towers of Pressburg, Hungarian Pozsony, rose before us. With the current foaming beneath, our canoe flew like a living thing, leaping under the old walls, darting past the ferry chains of the Fliegende Brücke, then plunging, laughing into the wild tangle of islands and sandbanks beyond, into the land of the willows. The change came suddenly, like a film reel snapping from city streets to wilderness. Within half an hour, there was no sign of human life. No roof, no fishing hut, no boat. Only endless water, wind, and the motion of willows. A deep spell fell over us. The charm of desolation. It was as if we had slipped into another world entirely. We joked that we ought to have brought a passport, for surely we had entered a different kingdom, one ruled by other beings with invisible warnings posted for trespassers who had the imagination to sense them. Though it was still early afternoon, the ceaseless wind had worn us out, and we began to look for a place to camp. But the islands were deceptive, their edges shifting, their shores treacherous. Each attempt to land sent the canoe spinning or scraped it against the willows. Branches whipped our hands as we grabbed for them. At last, with a strong shove from the wind, we slid into a quiet backwater and beached the bow on yellow sand. Panting and laughing, we lay back, grateful for the warmth of the sun and the brief stillness. Around us, the wind still raced through the willows, and the river flashed in 1,000 leaping lights. The bushes seemed to applaud us with their rustling hands. "What a river!" I said to my companion, thinking of all the miles behind us, from the Danube's tiny, bubbling birth in the Black Forest to this wild, untamed land. "Won't stand much nonsense now, will it?" the Swede replied, pulling the canoe further ashore before settling down for a nap. I lay beside him, content, surrounded by water, wind, sand and sunlight. Behind us stretched the journey already made. Ahead, the long path to the Black Sea. How lucky I felt to travel it with such a companion, my friend the Swede, cheerful, strong and steady. We had taken many trips together, but the Danube was unlike any river we had known. From its quiet beginnings in the pine gardens of Donaueschingen to this wandering wilderness, it had seemed alive, a creature of moods and tempers. We had watched it grow from a sleepy stream to a mighty force, playful and wild, a being with a deep soul. We knew its every sound, the hiss of its rapids, the thunder beneath its surface, the song it sang to the moon, and the laughter it roared when the wind tried in vain to hold it back. It was more than a river to us. It was a companion, almost a god. At night, it whispered under our tent. By day, it chattered against the bridges, roared at the mountains, or lay smiling in slow golden curves where the sun poured down. It had moods and voices, dignity in the towns, mischief in the hills, gentleness in the plains. In its youth, back in the Swabian forests, it had been full of tricks, disappearing underground only to rise again miles away, leaving us to wade and push through its shallow bed. Later, below Passau, where the river Inn joins it in thundering force, the Danube learned humility, surrendering to the stronger stream. And by the time we reached Straubing, it had slowed to a dreamlike crawl, moving under the blazing June sun as if half asleep. Birds and beasts loved it too. Cormorants lined its banks, crows crowded its sandbars, and storks stood fishing in the shallows. Hawks circled overhead. We had seen deer swim across at sunrise and fawns peer shyly from the brush. Once, a stag met our eyes from the river's edge. Even foxes crept along the driftwood. But now, beyond Pressburg, everything changed. The Danube grew stern, powerful, no longer playful. It split into 3 wide arms, rejoining only far downstream. For a canoe, it was a dangerous labyrinth. A Hungarian officer we met in Pressburg had warned us, if you take the wrong channel, you may be stranded 40 miles from anywhere when the flood falls. No people, no farms, no help. The river is rising and the wind will worsen. We laughed off his warning, though we stocked extra food, just in case. The rising water did not frighten us, but the wind was relentless. It tore through the clear sky like a living thing. We made camp earlier than usual that day. The sun still stood high as we beached our canoe on a small triangular island, less than an acre of sand just a few feet above the water. Its far end was drenched with flying spray, the wind driving waves against the bank. Standing there, I watched the crimson flood racing past with a roar, shaking the ground beneath me. The willows bent and thrashed in the gale, creating the strange illusion that the whole island moved. The river above us came pouring down like a shining slope of water, foaming and leaping as if alive. It was an awe-inspiring sight. wild, lonely, and beautiful. Yet as I watched, a strange uneasiness stirred within me. Perhaps it was the rising flood, or the thought of how easily this small island could be swept away. Perhaps it was the vastness, the endless movement of water and wind. But deeper than awe, deeper even than fear, came a feeling I could not name, that we had trespassed upon something ancient and alive. It was not the river, nor the storm, but the willows themselves that seemed to hold this secret power. Their endless ranks, miles upon miles of them, moved in the wind like sentient beings, whispering, waiting, watching. They filled the horizon, crowding the river, pressing in from all sides. It seemed to me then that they were not merely trees, but the outward signs of something greater, something that belonged to another world, one not meant for human presence. I felt absurdly that we were not wanted there. The feeling passed as quickly as it came, though it left behind a faint unease that never quite went away. I said nothing to my friend, of course. He was not a man of imagination. He would have laughed. We pitched our tent in a shallow hollow sheltered from the wind. "A poor camp," the Swede said, practical as ever. "No stones, no wood. We'll move on early tomorrow. This sand won't hold." We made the tent as snug as we could and went searching for driftwood. The river tore at its banks, swallowing clumps of earth and willow roots with every gust. "The island's smaller already," said the Swede, studying the shore. "It won't last long at this rate. Better keep the canoe close, and I'll sleep in my clothes." He was climbing along the edge when I heard him call out suddenly, his tone sharp. "By Jove!" "What's this?" I ran to him. He was pointing at something dark spinning in the water. "Good heavens! It's a man's body!" he cried. A black shape turned over and over in the foam. It vanished, then rose again, a pale gleam of eyes catching the sunset. Then it rolled under with a flash and was gone. "An otter!" we shouted together, laughing in relief. But for that instant, it had looked horribly human. Not long after, we saw another strange thing. A man in a small boat flying down the opposite shore. A rare sight on the Danube, rarer still in flood. He stood upright, steering with a long oar, his gestures wild. We could hear him shouting, but the wind tore his words away. "He's crossing himself," I said. The Swede nodded. "Superstitious fellow, no doubt. They believe these islands are haunted. Spirits, fairies, demons, perhaps. He probably took us for ghosts." He said it lightly, but his voice was strained. We spoke little more that evening. The wind grew fiercer, the willows louder, the river thundered. When the moon rose, bright and full, it turned the plain to silver, a shining sea of leaves and rippling water. We lay beside our small fire, talking quietly of other places far away. Neither of us spoke of the strange boatman or the otter or the curious feeling of being unwelcome. It was as if we both understood that certain subjects should not be named aloud here. The wind roared, the river hissed, and the willows whispered. And at last, lulled by their voices, we fell asleep, our tent trembling gently around us as the night covered all with its soft and uneasy peace. When I awoke, the light was already soft and golden. The storm had passed and the wind was only a whisper through the willows. For a moment I lay still, half dreaming, listening to that endless rustle, not the roar of a gale but a low, ceaseless murmur, as though countless tiny beings were moving together, whispering secrets to one another. It filled the morning air like the sound of a breathing world. The Swede was already up. He stood knee-deep in the river, washing our breakfast tin, His sleeves rolled high, his movements deliberate and calm. The air smelled sweet and clean. Mist drifted along the surface of the river, turning the willows into ghostly shapes that shimmered and swayed, half seen and half imagined. "Sleep well?" he called. "Like a log," I answered, though that wasn't quite true. Strange dreams had pressed on me through the night. Dreams of motion and whispering voices, of endless branches closing overhead. We made coffee and ate in silence, the stillness broken only by the soft lapping of water on the sand. Afterward, we packed up quickly. The island had shrunk again during the night. The flood was rising fast, the main current now only a dozen yards from our tent site. "Another foot by evening," said the Swede, studying the waterline. "We'll find a higher island tonight." We pushed off, the canoe gliding out into the current. The river carried us forward easily, yet with a force that made steering difficult. The channels twisted and divided, a maze of rushing water, each passage vanishing among the willows. The trees leaned close on either side, brushing our paddles, their silver leaves glimmering in the morning sun. Above us, the sky was a pale, delicate blue. Below, the water shone with hints of copper and green. It was beautiful, but it was beauty of a strange, uneasy kind. Sometimes we lost sight of the sky altogether, hemmed in by the moving branches. The current would suddenly change direction, sweeping us sideways into a narrow cut where the air was still and heavy, the surface smooth as oil. Then, with a swirl, we'd burst out again into blinding light and open water, laughing with relief. By noon the sun burned fiercely overhead, and we stopped for lunch on a small sandbank that barely rose above the current. As we ate, I noticed the sand trembled under my boots. The entire island seemed to quiver with the river's motion, like a living thing breathing beneath us. "This whole place is floating," I said uneasily. The Swede nodded. "We'll move soon. The water's eating it away from below." We rested in the shade of the willows, the leaves whispering all around. Their movement was endless, always a shifting, sighing sound, as if they spoke in a tongue just beyond understanding. I dozed a little, and in that half-sleep I fancied I heard the sound of something else among them, a thin, far-off crying, or perhaps a chorus of faint laughter. When I woke, it was gone, and the Swede was already repacking the gear. We paddled on for several hours, sometimes silent, sometimes speaking of the curious landscape, how empty it was, how no birds sang, how even the insects seemed rare. There was life here, surely, yet not the kind we knew. By evening the wind had risen again, though not so fiercely as before. We found a larger island, fringed with willows but solid enough for a good camp. The sand was firm, the inner ground carpeted with long grass. We pulled the canoe ashore, pitched the tent, and made a small fire of driftwood. The smoke drifted upward and was lost among the swaying branches. For a long time we sat watching the river, the last light fading into violet and gold. The sun sank behind the far line of trees, and the Danube turned to molten copper. When the stars came out, they trembled in the water like sparks caught on the surface. It was then that the Swede spoke quietly, as though not wishing to disturb the hush. "Do you feel it too?" I looked at him, puzzled. "Feel what?" He hesitated. "That presence." I waited, not answering. "I've felt it all day," he went on, as though the place were alive, watching us. Not hostile exactly, but aware. The words struck me with a curious sense of relief, for I had felt it too. that faint, invisible attention pressing on us from all sides, strongest when the willows bent close together as if whispering behind our backs. "Yes," I said softly. "I know what you mean." He poked the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. "These islands," he said, "they're not meant for men. There's something here older than we are. The river knows it. The willows too. The idea might have sounded absurd anywhere else. Yet here, in the flickering firelight with the whispering leaves all around, it seemed perfectly natural, almost obvious." We talked for a while longer, then fell silent again, listening to the rustle that never ceased. The sound filled the night like breathing, a deep, slow rhythm that came from everywhere at once. At last we crawled into the tent. The sand was cool beneath us, the wind gentler now. The moon rose late, flooding the river with pale light that trembled on the canvas walls. Sleep came slowly. Once or twice I fancied I heard something moving outside. Not the wind, nor water, but a light, stealthy rustle, as though footsteps passed among the willows. Each time I raised my head and listened, but there was nothing. Only that endless whispering, rising and falling like voices in a dream. I must have dozed at last, for suddenly I awoke with a start. The moonlight lay in a white square across the tent floor. The Swede was asleep beside me, breathing heavily. Then I heard it again, distinctly this time. A sound like something brushing against the tent, a soft, deliberate pressure, slow and searching, moving along the canvas from one side to the other. My heart leapt. I held my breath. The movement stopped, then began again, circling us like a curious hand feeling for a way in. I turned my head cautiously. The Swede was awake now, his eyes open, fixed on mine. "You hear it too?" I whispered. He nodded. For a moment we lay there, listening. The sound came again. That faint sliding touch along the canvas, as though a body without weight drifted past, close enough to brush the fabric. Then silence. The Swede moved noiselessly and reached for the lantern. He struck a match. The tiny flare filled the tent with sudden light. There was nothing. The stillness outside was perfect. The river glimmered like silver through the open flap. The willows swayed gently in the moonlight. We looked at each other without speaking. Then, slowly, he turned down the light and lay back. "Wind," he said quietly. "Just the wind." But his voice was tight, and I knew he didn't believe it. I didn't either. For the rest of the night I lay awake, listening to the whispering of the willows, and every now and then, beneath their sighing, I thought I heard that other sound again, a faint, stealthy brushing, circling just beyond the canvas walls. The morning came soft and grey. Mist lay over the river, drifting in pale ribbons that caught the early sun and melted. I crawled from the tent, feeling heavy, my mind full of fragments of uneasy sleep, circling footsteps, faint brushing sounds, whispers that faded when I woke. The Swede was already at the water's edge, crouched beside the canoe. He glanced up as I joined him, and I saw by his face that he too had slept little. "The island's smaller," he said shortly. I looked. It was true. The water had crept higher in the night. Our fire pit was gone, the sand around the tent damp and pitted with bubbles where the river had soaked through. The wind was fresh again, stirring the willows so that their silver leaves flashed and hissed. We breakfasted without much talk. Both of us avoided mentioning the sounds of the night, though they lingered unspoken between us. The Swede was practical as always. busy stowing gear, checking ropes, noting the current. Yet even in his brisk movements I sensed tension, the same watchfulness I felt in myself. When we pushed off, the canoe slid silently into the broad current. The willows closed in on either side, their branches dipping into the water, trailing long fingers that brushed our paddles as we passed. It was beautiful, peaceful even, but the beauty carried unease. The air felt charged, as though unseen things waited just beyond sight. After an hour, we came to a long reach where the river widened. The islands here were mere strips of sand thick with willow growth. The sky above was vast and empty. The horizon shimmered in the heat. "There!" said the Swede, suddenly pointing. At first, I saw nothing but the glare on the water. Then, far downstream, a shape moved across the current. Something dark and low, gliding swiftly before the wind. "A boat?" I asked. He shaded his eyes. No sail, no paddles either. We watched it a long time. It drifted toward the bank, spun once, and vanished among the willows. "A log," I said at last. "Perhaps." His tone was flat. The sun rose higher, burning the mist away. By noon we found another island, larger than the rest and rimmed with a low ridge of sand. We drew up the canoe and made camp in its centre among a cluster of willows that gave good shade. The Swede unpacked in silence. I wandered to the edge and looked out over the flood. The river boiled past with a sound like distant thunder. Everywhere the willows moved, thousands upon thousands of them, bending, nodding, whispering. A strange thought came to me, that all these bending shapes were aware of us, that they leaned together not by accident, but in some vast, secret conversation. When the wind passed through them, the motion seemed purposeful, an immense and silent language of gesture. I turned quickly, angry at myself. Yet even then I caught sight of the Swede standing still, watching me with the same uneasy look I must have worn. "You feel it again," I said quietly. He nodded. "Yes. Stronger. Much stronger." He stooped and drew a rough circle in the sand with the end of his paddle. "We are in the centre of something," he said. "I don't think it's the river. It's larger, older, and it doesn't belong to us." The words made me shiver, though the sun beat hot on my shoulders. That afternoon we went for driftwood along the inner shore. Once, while gathering sticks, I thought I saw movement beyond the trees. A shape, tall and thin, slipping quickly among the trunks. When I looked again, there was nothing. I said nothing to the Swede. Later, as we ate our supper by the fire, the wind freshened again. The sky turned the colour of steel. Shadows deepened under the willows, and the air grew thick and charged. The Swede stared into the flames. "They're closer tonight," he murmured. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. When darkness fell, the whispering began anew, soft at first, then rising until it filled the night. The willows swayed and rustled like a sea of voices. The firelight wavered. The sand shifted beneath us as the flood gnawed at the island's edge. I tried to talk of ordinary things, our route, our food, but my voice sounded foolish, hollow. The Swede only nodded absently, his eyes fixed beyond the glow, as though he watched something moving there. A gust of wind tore through the branches, scattering sparks. In that instant, I thought I saw shapes, pale, wavering forms among the trees, as though the wind itself had taken body. They bent and lifted, endless, featureless, yet strangely human in outline. The fire hissed. The vision vanished. We built the flames higher, Though the wood was damp and smoked, the air seemed full of faint, shrill crying. Perhaps the wind, perhaps not. "Listen," I whispered. The Swede raised his head. For a long moment neither of us breathed. Then, faint and far, we heard it clearly. A sound like voices calling across the river, thin and mournful, rising and falling with the wind. No human voices, too wild, too remote for that, yet unmistakably alive. The Swede stood slowly. "They're not of our world," he said under his breath. "This place touches something beyond. They want us gone." His words struck through me like cold water. I stared at him, speechless. The fire crackled between us, throwing shadows that danced up the willows' trunks like climbing hands. He turned suddenly and seized the canoe's rope, dragging it higher up the sand. "If the island goes, we must go with it," he said sharply. We worked in silence. The wind shrieked above the river, the willows bending and writhing like things alive. The moon rose late, a pale disk behind torn clouds. When at last we crept into the tent, exhaustion dulled our fear, but not enough for sleep. The whispering never stopped. It grew and changed, now a murmur, now a rush, as though countless small beings moved just outside. Once, a shadow fell across the moonlit canvas, tall, wavering, formless. It lingered a moment, then passed. I heard the Swede's breathing quicken. "What do they want?" I whispered. His answer came slowly, scarcely audible. "To drive us out." He turned toward me, eyes wide in the dim light. "We mustn't think of them," he said urgently. "Don't imagine. Don't picture them. That's how they come, through thought." I didn't understand, but I obeyed. I fixed my mind on ordinary things, the fire's ashes, the weight of the paddle, the smell of smoke. For a time, it worked. The whispering faded, the wind dropped. But soon another sound rose, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the very ground, like the pulse of something enormous beneath us. I felt the sand tremble. The Swede sat up. "They're here," he said quietly. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ceased. Silence returned, deep and vast. The only sound was the sigh of the river and the faint rustle of leaves. But we did not sleep again that night. When dawn came, pale and colourless, we found the island smaller still. Half our gear was damp from the creeping water. The air was strangely still, the willows motionless for the first time in days. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like waiting. Something, somewhere, was watching us. The light that morning had a dull, heavy quality, as though the world itself were tired. A pale mist lay upon the river, clinging to the branches, drifting through the willows like breath. We moved about camp in silence. Both of us felt it, the same strange pressure in the air, that sense of being watched by something vast and unseen. The Swede broke the stillness first. "We'll have to move," he said. "The island won't last another night." He was right. The water had climbed halfway up the bank. Our footprints from yesterday were gone. The place where the canoe had rested was now a shallow pool. The river was claiming what remained. We packed in haste, though every small task seemed oddly difficult, as though invisible hands delayed us, tugging at ropes, scattering small things in the sand. Twice I thought I heard a faint splash behind the willows, as if something moved just out of sight. When we turned to drag the canoe down, we stopped short. The paddle was gone. We searched the camp, the reeds, the water's edge. Nothing. It had been laid beside the tent the night before. The sand where it had rested was smooth, untouched, as though no weight had ever lain there. The Swede said nothing, but I saw the colour drain from his face. We had only one paddle left. Without another, steering the canoe through the current would be nearly impossible. "It's not the river," he said quietly. "Something took it." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words withered. Deep down, I knew he was right. We stood there in the still air, listening. The willows hung motionless, their leaves heavy with mist. The silence was immense. "Let's go," he said at last. "Now." We pushed off, the Swede taking the stern, guiding us with firm, practiced strokes. The current seized the canoe at once, sweeping us forward between the islands. Without a second paddle, I could do little but steady our drift and watch the swirling water flash past. The bank slid by in endless green-grey lines. The willows leaned close, their thin leaves brushing my arms like fingers. Everywhere, I felt that same unnatural awareness, as if the land itself looked on. By midday, the current carried us into a wide, open reach. The sun burned through the mist, fierce and blinding, and for a time it felt almost normal again, just two travellers alone in a great wilderness. But the relief did not last. At the next bend, the water grew shallow, and the canoe grated against something solid. We jumped out, wading through waist-deep current to free it. The river bottom was soft and shifting beneath our feet. As I tugged at the bow, my hand brushed something smooth under the surface, a round shape, firm and cold. I bent to look. It was the missing paddle. It lay wedged between two roots, half buried in mud. For a long moment, I could not move. There were no marks in the sand, no sign that it had floated there. It was as if it had simply appeared. I pulled it free and held it up. "Here!" I called. The Swede waded over, staring at it in silence. He took it from me, turned it in his hands, then pointed to the blade. There, pressed deep into the wood, were long, thin marks, 4 parallel grooves, evenly spaced, as though made by fingers. Human fingers. I felt my stomach twist. Could it be driftwood scraping? He shook his head. "No. Look. They curve." The grooves did curve slightly, like the pressure of a hand closing. We stared at each other. Then he dropped the paddle into the canoe and said, "Come. We can't stay here." We climbed in and the Swede set us drifting again. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The sun blazed overhead, but it brought no warmth. That afternoon the wind returned, sudden and violent. The willows writhed and bent, their whispering rising to a strange high chorus. The river boiled with foam. The canoe rocked wildly. We strained against the gusts, water slapping over the sides. Every moment I expected to be overturned. When at last we reached a small island, we pulled ashore, exhausted. The sky had gone grey again. The air was thick and electric. We collapsed beside the canoe, catching our breath. The Swede broke the silence first. "They're angry." His tone was flat, certain. "Angry?" I repeated. "At what?" "At us. For coming here. For seeing what we weren't meant to see." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "This region, it's different from the rest of the world. The veil between things is thinner here. These islands." He gestured to the endless stretch of willows around us. "They belong to something else, another plane of existence, close to ours but not meant to touch it." I said nothing. "They're not ghosts," he went on, "not spirits of the dead. They're beings, natural in their own world as we are in ours, And somehow, through this flood, this storm, we've drifted into their sphere. They want us gone before we break the balance. He looked up suddenly, his eyes intense. We must keep our thoughts clear. They act through imagination. Fear gives them form. The words chilled me, yet they fit too perfectly. The sense of being watched, the strange touches in the night, the whispering, it all came together. If they mean us harm, I began. They don't mean, he interrupted softly. They are. Meaning belongs to our world, not theirs. We sat there until the sun sank behind the willows. The river glowed like molten glass, and the air felt thick with waiting. That night we did not light a fire. The Swede said the light drew them. We ate in silence, then sat side by side in the dusk, listening. The whispering came again, rising and falling like the breath of sleeping giants. Sometimes it swelled to a roar, sometimes it sank to the faintest murmur, as if the willows whispered directly into our ears. When the moon rose, pale and thin, I thought I saw movement at the far end of the island. A shimmer among the trees, as if the moonlight itself had taken shape. It quivered, vanished, appeared again nearer. I gripped the Swede's arm. He saw it too. "Don't look," he whispered. "They notice when we see." We turned our eyes away. The whispering grew louder, closer. The air felt charged with invisible motion. I could feel it on my skin, like static, prickling and alive. Something brushed against the tent, then again, then all around. We held our breath. The sand shivered beneath us. A sound like low humming filled the air, rising in pitch until it seemed the whole island vibrated with it. Then, as before, it stopped. When I dared to move, I found my hands were trembling. The Swede exhaled slowly. "They're very near now," he said. "Tomorrow we leave, whatever it costs. If we stay another night, we may not get away at all." I nodded, unable to answer. We lay awake till dawn, waiting for light. And though the whispering faded with the morning wind, its echo stayed in our minds long after. The dawn came cold and white. A thin mist clung to the ground, and the island seemed smaller still. The river gnawing at its edges like some slow, patient creature. We spoke little as we packed. Our hands moved quickly, yet every sound, a buckle snapping, a rope dragging through sand, felt too loud in that enormous hush. The Swede's face was drawn and pale. "No fire," he said. "We leave at once." We pushed the canoe into the current. The water seized us eagerly, swirling between the willows. It was as if the river itself wished to speed our going. For a while we drifted in silence. The mist lifted, revealing miles of shining water and endless ranks of trees. The sun broke through and the air warmed. It should have been comforting. Instead, the brightness felt strange, too clean, too still, as though something waited behind it. Then, suddenly, the canoe swerved. The current caught us sideways and drove us hard toward the bank. The Swede shouted, thrusting the paddle deep, fighting the pull. I flung my weight to balance, but the water roared, boiling beneath us. We struck a hidden root and spun half around. For one breathless second I thought we would capsize. Then, just as quickly, the pressure eased. The canoe shot free, trembling and steadied again. We were both drenched, shaking. "That wasn't the current," the Swede said grimly. I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "They tried to upset us." He spoke so quietly that the words seemed part of the wind, yet I knew he meant them. I wanted to protest, to reason, but the look in his eyes silenced me. We paddled on. The channel narrowed. On either side, the willows leaned so close their branches met above us, forming a tunnel of shifting silver. The light dimmed, turning green and uncertain. The air grew heavy. A faint humming began, low, continuous, vibrating through the wood of the canoe, through our bones. The sound deepened until it became a kind of pressure on the ears, painful and alive. "Don't think," the Swede said suddenly. His voice was strained. "Keep your mind empty." They reached through thought. I tried. I fixed my eyes on the moving water, on the ripples at the bow, on the paddle's rhythm, but already strange images pressed into my mind. Shapes vast and formless, bending over us, filling the air from horizon to horizon. I felt them rather than saw them. Immense presences, silent, formless, weightless, yet powerful beyond imagining. The willows shivered as though in answer. A wave of dizziness swept over me. I gripped the side of the canoe. The world tilted. The whispering rose to a chorus, countless thin voices calling from every branch. Then the Swede cried out, pointing ahead. Through the drifting mist loomed a dark, solid shape, a fixed island, larger than any we had seen. Its shore rose high above the flood, its trees thick and unmoving. "Head for that!" he shouted. I obeyed blindly. The current helped us. Within minutes the canoe grounded in shallow water and we stumbled ashore, dragging it up the bank. The instant my feet touched solid ground, the pressure lifted. The humming stopped. The air was clear and still. We stood there, gasping, hearts pounding, staring back at the willows. They swayed gently, harmless now, their leaves flashing in sunlight like any ordinary trees. "Are we safe?" I whispered. "For now," said the Swede. We found a dry hollow among the roots and collapsed, too spent to speak. The sun climbed higher. The river glimmered below, peaceful and golden. After a long while he turned to me. "Do you understand what we saw?" I shook my head. "They were not evil," he said slowly, "nor good. They simply are. Great indifferent powers that exist beside our world. We touched their frontier by accident and they resented it. That is all." He fell silent again, staring at the moving water. "They will forget us," he added softly, "once we're gone." We rested until late afternoon. When the shadows lengthened, we carried the canoe to the far side of the island, where a calmer channel ran. The air felt different there, lighter, cleaner, as if some invisible boundary had been crossed. We launched and drifted once more downstream. The river gleamed peacefully in the sun. The banks widened. The wind grew friendly. By nightfall, we reached the first signs of human life. A fisherman's hut, smoke rising faintly among the reeds. The sight filled me with a sudden, almost painful relief. The Swede smiled faintly. "You see," he said, "they've let us go." We camped that night on firm ground under poplars instead of willows. The air was still and warm, the stars bright and steady overhead. For the first time in many days, we slept deeply and without dreams. When morning came, the river was calm, the sky clear. Nothing in the shining world hinted at what had passed, at the vast, whispering shapes that had watched us from beyond the veil. Only once did the Swede speak of it again. As we loaded the canoe, he said quietly, "We will not tell others. They would not believe, and perhaps He paused, glancing toward the horizon, where a distant line of willows shimmered in the heat. Perhaps it's better they never know. The wind rustled faintly through the leaves, a long, soft sigh. Then all was still. We paddled on, leaving the willows behind us forever. You've been listening to The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, a story that reminds us how thin the veil can be between our world and something else entirely. If you enjoyed this tale, please like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story under the moonlight. Until next time, rest well, dream deep, and may the whispering willows stay only in your imagination.